Sports Betting Integrity Masterclass for Regulatory Authorities.
So, hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Antonio Abdulla, and I represent the International Betting Integrity Association, or IBIA in short. And I have with me today, it's such a pleasure to have with me the International Tennis Integrity Agency, who will be delivering also a part of this masterclass. We'll go into some details about our respective associations later into the presentation, because I think that will give a little bit more context to some of the data we will be showing as well. And before we go straight into it, because I know time is what it is, I just want to thank Sigma for one, inviting me back on the stage, but more importantly, for giving the topic of sports integrity the attention that it deserves. Now, I'm going to assume that most of you here, if not all, know what we are referring to when we mention the words match fixing. And I say this because whenever there is a match fixing incident, especially if it's affecting a top-tier event, it usually gets widely reported in the media. But to remove any doubt, when we talk about match fixing, here we are referring to when a game's result or a moment within a game, which in that case we refer to it as spot fixing, is rigged on purpose for personal or third-party gain. Now, many think that whenever there is a match fixing incident, there is always a sports betting component, which is not actually the case. If we look at a study issued by the University of Ghent in 2021, it actually showed that most athletes who are approached to fix an event are approached to fix the event for sporting reasons. Now, when we say sporting reasons, here we're looking at an event being fixed to affect the standings of that particular league table, or as the event would be fixed because the outcome of that event would mean that I will face an easier or more difficult opponent in the next round. The reasons could be various. But understandably, it's the sports betting-related match fixing which gets the most attention. And rightfully so, because when you have a sports betting-related match fixing, it's not only the sporting world, it's not only the sports sector which is at a loss there, but it's also the sports betting sector which is at a loss there. And in fact, in a study which we issued way back in 2021, we estimated that the regulated betting industry actually loses around $25 million in a single year because of match fixing. And remember, when we speak about match fixing, we're actually talking about a criminal act. So there's always a dark figure of crime there. So even back in 2021, the estimated number was 25 million, but it was actually more. And also bear in mind that this study goes back to 2021, and we expect that if we had to do the study this year, the amount would be much more than this. Is there a solution to at least mitigate sports betting-related match fixing? There is no perfect solution, but I would like to focus on 2 points which do help a lot. The first one, which is very important, is to continue pushing for more dynamic, competitive, and well-regulated sports betting jurisdictions. As many of you know, there are still jurisdictions in the world across the globe which still do not regulate sports betting. And obviously, as a result of this, many of the sports betting activity takes place on the unregulated markets. And these are markets which have no incentive to protect the integrity of sports or sports betting. But the key word here is actually collaboration, and that is why it was so important to actually do this presentation together. Because the collaboration between sports and sports betting, as we will hopefully show in this masterclass session, is essential. But it's important to also highlight the fact that when we speak about collaboration, it's not just between sports and sports betting, but it's also collaboration with law enforcement, with regulators, with policymakers, and so on. And in fact, it was under this umbrella of collaboration that the International Betting Integrity Association was actually created 20 years ago. Just as a quick backstory, 20 years ago there was a huge betting scandal in Germany. As a result of that, a number of betting operators got together and actually saw that if they had actually communicated with each other, if they had actually told each other what they were seeing on their respective betting markets, then they would have saved each other a lot of money, but also they would have saved with respect to reputation, etc. There's a number of losses which are incurred when you are subject to fraud related to match fixing. And that's pretty much how IBIA was created. Obviously, the technology at the time was not what it is today. So all communications between the respective operators was being done via email, manually. Even the monitoring of the markets at the time were very on a manual basis. So it's a very different world today. And that's also with IBIA in general. So fast forward 20 years, we're an association of 90 plus members and representing over 200 brands. So the most well-renowned operators, you will probably find that they're part of IBIA. Just a couple of examples: Bet365, Betsin, Leo Vegas. If we go to the US, FanDuel, DraftKings, all of these are IBIA members. And it's important to know that we're a not-for-profit association. So we do this work for free. All our work is covered on the basis of our membership fees. We don't have any profit-making margins whatsoever, and we provide all of our reports to sports and our other partners for free. And we have 3 key aims. One of them, and I'll start with the last one actually, is research and education, which is essential, especially for the prevention part of this topic. Like I said before, pushing for well-regulated jurisdictions is essential, and therefore we do promote good governance and do a lot of policy work with different governments and different regulators globally. But I would say the most important key aim for us, and which is the sort of the topic of today, is to combat betting corruption and to protect the integrity of sports and sports betting. And we mainly do this through our global monitoring and alerting platform. And I guess I would say this is the most important slide, at least for my part of this masterclass, because this pretty much shows how the data is generated and how that data actually arrives to the investigators. And starting with step 1, this is how we get their operator intelligence. So basically, once one of the sports betting operators who are a member of IBIA recognizes unusual activity going through their systems, that is when they raise a flag. That is when they raise an alert on the global map. And immediately, all of the other membership gets alerted about that report which would have been raised. And that gives opportunity to all of those betting operators to double-check their markets, to see whether they've actually been targeted in a similar way. And believe me, like my colleagues can agree, when an event is fixed in a professional way, in most cases, it is not just one operator who's being targeted, but multiple operators. And that is when all of these different operators start feeding in alerts to the global map. And that leads us to step 2. And that is when our operations team at IBIA analyze those alerts and see whether that unusual activity which was reported tantamounts to suspicious activity. And if yes, they'll go on and report that. We'll go on and report it to the respective entity, which is usually a sporting entity in charge of investigating that report. And that is when that report is sent out to sports or an integrity agency like the likes of the ITIA. Now, step 4 is very important. Step 4, it's important because all our members are bound by a code of conduct. And as part of that code of conduct, they need to be compliant with the respective investigation. So if an investigator needs more data from our members, then those members need to provide what we refer to as account-level data or operator intelligence to the respective entity. And does this process achieve results? yes, as you will see in my last slide, and therefore I will not focus too much on step 5, but yes, this process does lead to a number of different sanctions and prosecutions. But before I move on to my last 2 slides, I thought it important to give you an idea of what the data which is provided by the sports betting industry look like. What is this operator intelligence? And this could be various. So it goes from customer identity and locations, showing the investigators whether there were unusual spikes in betting volumes, showing the investigators whether there were any bets which were very different to the usual behavior of that specific bettor placing that bet, which obviously is very important for an investigator. Surges in account creation, especially before a specific event which is suspected to be fixed. And this is actually a common typology which we see, a lot of new account creations being created before an event which is suspected to be fixed. And it could be for various reasons. It could be because there is knowledge about that fix, and a lot of people are creating accounts quickly to be able to benefit from that. There's also the fact that we see clusters of activity in specific locations. You could have a group of friends who are placing those suspicious bets together in a specific location, and so on. The list goes on. But as you can see, this is data which the sports betting operators can provide, and which, as you can imagine, very useful to investigators. Now, to start closing off my part of the presentation, some numbers just to give you a view of the extent of the issue at hand. So if we had to go back to 2019, to date, we raised about 1,200 suspicious betting alerts to our partners. I say about because remember, the global map is a live thing, so even as we speak, we could have alerts being raised. But at the time of doing this presentation, which was last week, it was around 1,200 alerts. And these encompass 21 different sports and affecting events coming from 102 different jurisdictions, different countries. Now, one might say, which are the most sports which are most targeted? And in our case, we can say that there are 5 sports which dominate the IBIA alerts. And these are football, tennis, table tennis, esports, and basketball, which make up actually 90% of all the alerts which we've reported since 2021 up until the end of Q3 of 2025. And as you can see from the chart, it's football and tennis who produce the events with most suspicious betting alerts. Together, they account for 61%. But interestingly, the sport of tennis, we've started to see a decline in the past years, as you can see from the turquoise line up there. And there's a number of reasons why this is happening, but one of the reasons is actually the very important work which the ITIA have been doing, and that's why I'm, like you, very looking forward to their part of the presentation. And my last slide, especially since I promised some numbers behind the sanctions and prosecutions. And yes, this process does work. This process is achieving results. In 2025 alone, and we actually usually publish this number at the end of the year in our annual report, but just to give you some insights already, in 2025 alone, we saw 21 athletes, teams or officials, who have been sanctioned directly in relation to IBIA alerts. And the total of 50 events that were reported by IBIA were actually found to have been corrupted. And if we had to extend that timeline and go back to 2021, we saw a total of 93 athletes, teams or officials who have been sanctioned directly in relation to IBIA alerts. And the total of 207 events which were reported by IBIA were later proven to be corrupted. So the idea of this first part of the masterclass is to show you what the sports betting community is doing in order to mitigate the threat of match fixing. And hopefully now, and I'll hand it over to my colleagues at the ITIA, you will see what sports are doing with this data, in addition, obviously, to other evidence which is at hand. So, Sarah, over to you. Would you like the... Uh,
Good afternoon. Firstly, Antonio, thank you for extending your invitation to us on this masterclass. We really appreciate the joint work that we do together, so thank you. So I'm Sarah Hamlet. I'm an investigator with the International Tennis Integrity Agency, and I'm here with my colleague, George, who will introduce himself in a short while. But we would like to say what our role is and explain to you today about the role of the ITIA. So firstly, we promote, encourage and safeguard the integrity of professional tennis worldwide. So that means we have global reach across all tennis matches across the world. We are based in London, but we have that global reach. We have two roles. We deal with anti-corruption, so that would involve match fixing and breaches of the tennis anti-corruption program, but we also manage the anti-doping. So that's the anti-doping program referred to as the TADP. So who are we? What are our responsibilities? We have 7 governing bodies that manage the sport of tennis. We have 3 professional tours, the World Tennis Tour, We have 3 tours. The WTA Tour, apologies, my brain's gone. We go on to Wheelchair Tour. We have 4 Grand Slams globally in France, Australia, the US, and in London. We have 213 member nations. We have 15,000 registered players playing the sport of tennis. We have internationally, we also have junior players who do not come under our program, but we educate and we will discuss that a little bit more, but they're an integral part of what we do. We have certified officials. We have 3,034 certified officials. We have annually tournaments, 1,600 globally, that we manage and are involved in with our players. And we have 125,000 matches, which is a lot to manage. So our role, our team, we have an in-house betting expert, which is invaluable to what we're dealing with a majority of the time, especially when we're dealing with anti-corruption related matters and betting on sport. So our in-house expert provides a great gateway to the betting operators, to the IBIA, and has that knowledge to enable him, and it is a him, to help us do our role, but also efficiently and effectively. We have information from other investigations. So, for example, players can report to us things that they see. So can the whole of the entire tennis family can report to us information about what is happening in the sport. That is invaluable information. And that needs to be timely, if we can, to make us as effective as we can be in our role. We have match alerts from the betting industry. Again, absolutely key to everything that we do, and that is often our start point to an investigation. And so any information that is shared with us or we request is invaluable because it opens a gateway of different lines of inquiry for us as investigators, and we want to exploit every opportunity to ensure that we are achieving our aim of keeping the sport clean. Intelligence from within the sport, I talked about players, but also we're relying on official coaches, anyone within the tennis family. That can be chair umpires, it can be anybody at a tournament who can provide information to us. So we are encouraging everyone to speak to us at any given opportunity. So I mentioned to you earlier that we are a global game. So we have global reach. we deal with anything across the world. So if we're looking at prize money versus breaking even for a tennis player, we're looking at vulnerabilities in the sport. One of them is, it could be, where is that person in the sport? Are they at the World Tennis Tour, where expenses are high, but the reward, as in from what they win at a tournament, could be fairly low income. So there is a vulnerability in the sport at that level. The liquidity of the markets is across all the levels of sport, but there are so many matches being played at the lower levels in the World Tennis Tour that again increases demand, and that is where often we're getting a majority of the alerts that are reported to us by the betting industry. Entry into sport, the usual route could be via being a junior player and then entering the World Tennis Tour. That isn't always the same, depending, for example, if you're coming from college sports, say, for example, in America, you may come directly into the World Tennis Tour as a professional tennis player. So again, we need to educate and make sure that those players entering at that level are also receiving the advice and guidance that they require. Ranking versus risk. If, as a corrupter, you would corrupt someone at the top of the tour, say at ATP level or WTA level, that would be a real coup. However, that's not what usually happens from our experience. What we're finding is that it's at the lower level where the vulnerability is for players. So that is where we spend a lot of our time, is with the lower level players, often at tournaments. The nature of scoring I've got there is at the lower level, and I'm saying lower level, but I mean World Tennis Tour, the scoring is done in the usual way by a PDA, but there are vulnerabilities there because often at that level there is no big screen like we have here today. We have no scoreboards. So therefore, there's a vulnerability. Say, for example, a chair umpire wanted to manipulate the match for betting purposes. That is easier to do because we don't always have the scoreboards. So therefore, the players are reliant totally on what the chair umpire would say whilst in the chair. I just quickly show you this image. If I speak to anyone outside of the sport, outside of the betting arena, I should say as well, this is where they think, as investigators, I spend all of my time. However, the reality looks... Yeah. Oh, apologies. Apologies. There's this picture there. People will think this is where I spend all my time at Grand Slams, you know, top WTA or ATP tournaments. We do attend those tournaments, I should say, but not necessarily for where the vulnerability in the sport is. This is the reality of where I spend my time. It will be at low-level World Tennis Tour tournaments at the start of the sport, and that is where the vulnerability is. And that is where we're finding, I would say, a majority of our match alerts are coming from this part of the game. This pyramid here, or two, I should say, it's trying to demonstrate, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, but if you look at the pyramid, the blue pyramid with a very small red tip to that, what the blue is representing is showing you a majority of the matches that are being played. However, the money gained, the money from winnings, sponsorship, well, mainly from winnings, is represented in the inverted pyramid. So basically, the majority of matches are gaining, the players are getting the least amount of money, as you can see in the small tip there. So if you're at the top of the game, that is where the money is for the players. So the blue pyramid is really representing visually to you how vulnerable those players are, because the money is so much lower depending where you are on the tour. And sponsorship also doesn't exist at the lower levels. You may be lucky as a player to maybe have someone who can give you rackets and maybe some equipment, but not full sponsorship. I'm now going to hand you over to my colleague George, who will introduce himself to you, who's going to do a case study.
Hello. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Antonio. So I'm also an investigator from the ITIA, and hopefully this case study that I'm going to go through will kind of give you an idea of where our investigations go and how useful the match alerts we receive from the IBIA are, and also how important it is to have that regulation and compliant betting operators to share the suspicious betting data with us, because without it, a lot of our investigations would never even get off the ground, let alone get to the point where we can charge people or sanction players for breaches of our code. So this case study is one of my recent investigations, and it did start from a match alert from the IBIA. Initially it was in relation to one player. So this match alert came through in relation to a player based in North America, and it went from there, from an investigation into one player, and we ended up investigating 5 players. These players were all based at ITF level. They played occasional ATP challenger level matches, but they were at that lower level of the professional game. And from that investigation, the start point, we got to the point where, as you can see here in some of the example of these messages, what we thought was one player that was involved in match fixing actually got to the point where that primary player, so player 1 I'll refer to them as, was actually involved in corrupting other players. So as you can kind of see here, these are messages that were taken from a conversation with a suspected corrupter, in which they were making inquiries for one of the player's friends to see if they would be willing to fix the match for $1,000 US. In return, the player would lose the first set, 6 games to love. So these match alerts can start from us thinking one player's involved to numerous other players being involved, and them becoming corruptors in their own right, to show the kind of scale and what these match alerts can do for us. So this match in question, it was actually a doubles match. It was a M25, so an ITF level match, and it was in the main draw first round. The M25 level ITF tournaments is, you could say, is the second lowest level of professional tennis. And at that level, just to kind of give a scale of how much money players could be earning in these matches. So if you won the whole doubles tournament, whole doubles draw at this tournament, between the 2 players, the partners, you would win $1,500 US. So that's split between 2. And throughout the whole competition, from the main draw and the singles and to the doubles, there's currently now $30,000 US up for grabs, but split between every single player in that tournament. So the money there is quite small, which, as kind of Sarah alluded to, is a driver behind why corruption exists in sport. So this match alert, this match was flagged as a result of a compliant betting operator, which identified that suspicious wagering was placed by a newly created Italian betting account. So this was an account that was created in the lead up to this match and placed highly targeted betting on this match only. The betting was targeted in relation to two games in both sets, so that this account exclusively bet on the outcome of Game 3 of Set 1 and the outcome of Game 3 of Set 2. Ultimately, those bets came to fruition, and that's why it was identified as suspicious. That information was passed on to IBIA, and then a match alert was created. So they looked into that match and saw, so the suspicious betting was placed on the team which originally, or based on the betting market, was deemed to have a 96% winning chance. So it was suspicious that a new betting account would place bets so targeted that went against what was suspected to happen. Not only that, the betting was almost max staked, so this new account placed as much money as it could on the outcome of these 2 specific games. IBIA then put the match alert together and sent that to us. So that's when our role as the ITIA begins, okay? And it's our starting block, that match alert, to begin an investigation. So we reviewed that match alert, and it was placed onto on our computer systems, and we would get researchers to begin an initial review of the information, look into those subjects. So the 2 suspicious players at this point, because we weren't sure which player was involved out of the 2 partners, as it was a double match, they were researched, and it was identified that neither of these players had ever come to notice to the ITIA before. Again, kind of highlighting the importance of a match alert, shows that this really was the starting block for an investigation into these players. So the investigation was initiated. Further checks were done. We would do open source research. We would check our systems and see if there are any related players. But at this point, in this stage, there was nothing else for us to go off. And that's where it moves into reviewing the scorecards and the match footage. So these are our primary steps in an investigation. So a scorecard, I'm not sure if many players would have seen, but that's how once a professional tennis match or any tennis match is presented, the outcome of the game. And I'll show you that in a second, what one looks like. So that would be reviewed. And then if we are able to, not every match at a professional level is streamed. We're getting closer to the point where almost all matches are streamed and that footage is stored. But in this case, because the alert came through so quickly after the bets were placed, we're able to download that match footage and retain it and review it. So this is just an excerpt of a scorecard, and from here I've taken out the key parts, what we would be looking at the start of an investigation into a suspicious tennis match. As you can see, player 1, the player that ultimately was sanctioned, they were partnered by a player which we didn't previously know about, and they won in straight sets, so they won 6-2, 6-2. That's in keeping with the way the market looked in advance of the match, where they were deemed as to be the outright favourites. They had played multiple matches at this level, while their opponents were relatively unknown. It's when you break it down and look at the suspicious games, which were highlighted as part of the match alert, that things become interesting. So you've got the first set there. It was identified that player 1 was playing in that match. And that in that third game of that first set, where the suspicious bettings were placed, we can see that player 1 actually was broken in that match. So player 1 was serving, but they lost that game. So they lost that game when traditionally, and again, it's depending on your knowledge of tennis, it's usually when a player is usually deemed that they should win their service game, and it's when they're broken it goes against the grain. So we can see their player 1 was broken, and not only were they broken, but they were served 2 double faults. And importantly, one of those double faults was on the last point of that game, which ultimately led to that successful suspicious betting outcome. We go on to the second set, and again, the game which the suspicious betting was placed on involved player 1 once more. Player 1 was serving. And this one is even more interesting in the sense you can see that there were 4 double faults in a row. This, incredibly unusual from our point of view. It's incredibly unlikely that a player would serve 4 double faults in a row. Even more suspicious is the fact that this player was actually 40 love up in this game. So technically it looked like they were going to win the game, and then suddenly you had these 4 double faults in a row. This was a massive kind of driver for this investigation, and from reviewing the match footage, which we fortunately were able to get from the speed of the match alert coming through, this player, unfortunately, we can't show it today, but the quality of the tennis, especially in these 4 double faults in a row, was quite comical at times. Balls were going out left, right, and centre, and you could see a sudden change from the playing style when they were leading to suddenly having to do these commit potentially what we believed to be purposeful 4 double faults in a row. So this is the initiation of kind of how an investigation would go from that first match alert. Fortunately, 3 months later, we actually received a second match alert. Quite unusual for this one. So this match alert wasn't in relation to this player 1, but it was actually in relation to a completely different match. And that started its own separate investigation. But our betting liaison officer, which Sarah alluded to earlier, our expert who's had 30 years of service within the sports betting industry, they applied to the betting operator that triggered this second match alert and requested the customer level betting data. That operator was compliant, and therefore we were able to get the full customer level betting data in relation to the second match alert. So that match alert, that customer level betting data, when we got that, we could see that this account, this wasn't a newly created account, it existed for over a year, and they had placed 300 bets across various different tennis matches. So completely different to that first alert, this account was frequently placing bets, and our betting liaison officer was able to determine, or could see that there was a change from what were traditional bets placed on Grand Slam or high-level tennis matches on kind of normal markets you'd expect bettors to place on, then became a lot more targeted and were being placed on lower-level tennis. Coincidentally, those bets then started to be placed on player 1. So our betting liaison officer found that 3 new matches, which we never knew about, which player 1 was involved in, and 14 bets across these 3 different matches have been placed on player 1 to basically lose certain elements of their match. So at this stage, we had the original match alert involving 1 match, but we now had 3 further matches that we were interested in. And that's really important for us because it gives us more reason to initiate the investigation, more lines of inquiry, and it allows us to give reason to potentially go to see that player and interview them. So at this stage, we had enough now to apply to what's our senior director of Intel and Investigations. They look over all our cases, and we would go to our senior director and we would ask for authority to to download the player's phone. So that's a massive part of our investigation, is being able to download a player's phone. It's written into our code that a player has to assist with an investigation. So we're able to basically say we have enough suspicion here, or we believe that this player is now fixing matches based on the match alert, or the 2 match alerts, and the senior director signed that off. So our next step is to go to the country. So we were able to travel to North America, where this player was based, and arrange for an interview and do that download process. So the player was approached, and an initial interview was held, and what we find, sadly, or frustratingly with a lot of our cases, on that first interview, a player will deny any involvement in match fixing. That was the case with this interview. The player said, denied any involvement, any knowledge of why these matches were being flagged or being flagged for having suspicious betting data or match alerts placed on them. But the player did actually admit to receiving some corrupt approaches. But they claimed that they never went through with these corrupt approaches. And obviously, under our rules, they've actually committed an offence there by failing to report until we've spoken to them. But we're more interested in finding out about these suspected fixed matches. So the interview was finished, and then the phone download was completed, and we also conducted some downloads of social media accounts. And this is when we got our key evidence from. So once the downloaders return to the UK, we're able to get an analyst to conduct a mobile forensic analysis of that download. And that's where we found key messages linking in these 4 further players, which up until this point, we had no knowledge of. So we reviewed I'll go on to that in a second, but the phone download, not only did it find information relating to these new players, but it found that information corroborating the match alerts we already had. So that's really key as well. Also, when we were able to identify these new players, we went back to that customer level betting data from the second match alert, and we were able to identify that there were 3 of the new players that we found from the phone download. They had also had their matches betted on within that customer level betting data. So once more, kind of reiterating, those matches were never flagged by the betting operators at the time. They were never flagged by IBIA. But we were able to go back and see this data, there's more to it. There's more players potentially involved in manipulating the outcome of their games. So here's another excerpt. So this is an excerpt from some messages with another suspected corruptor. Once again, this is player 1, so this is the player's phone that we downloaded. Basically, they're having a conversation in the lead up to their match in real time. And because of the date and time of that, we were able to identify the exact match they were talking about. And this player said, yep, my first serve and the third serve, is that right? And as you can see, they then go on to say, the corruptor, or the suspected corruptor said, yes, first serving game in less than 15. If it's 0, better, you don't make more. And this is quite common across, or we find this quite common across tennis investigations, is there's usually a set way that a corruptor will want a tennis player to lose their match. And in this scenario, the corruptor wants the player to lose basically as quickly as possible to love, to 0, or to 15. And that gives less margin for error. And it also assists with the betting markets when they're placing those bets. This conversation was actually quite a long conversation in the lead up to the match. And ultimately, the player was seen to be basically bargaining with the corruptor and saying that I'm only going to fix the match unless you pay me in advance. So this last excerpt here, this was taken once the match had finished. And the player's basically saying in frustration that they fixed the first game, so the first game in the first set, to love, as described. But because they didn't see any messages about a bank transfer, they didn't go through with fixing the outcome of that, the third game in the first set. And as we kind of showed with the scorecard there earlier, we reviewed the scorecard and we could see exactly as what was described in the messages. That player lost that first service game to love, and the third service game they went on to win. So we were fairly happy that the outcome of that match had been contrived. Moving on to some of the other players that were identified during this investigation. So going back to that customer level betting data we received, one of the doubles matches that involving player 1 also involved a player that I'll refer to as player 2, and this conversation is taken between player 1 and player 2. So we had suspicions around a doubles match from that customer level betting data, and these messages were actually sent immediately after that match and over the following next 2 days. Basically, player 1 and player 2 were going back and forth and talking about their frustrations of not being paid immediately after their match and not being paid for what we believe to be them contriving the outcome of that match. So the player 2 here is actually saying that the corruptors usually earn about $1,000 from this match fixing, and was asking basically where the money was. Ultimately, player 1 confirmed that money was received, so a Western Union money transfer was received, and they received $930 for fixing the outcome of that match. The conversation also included screenshots of the bank transfer. It also included the player's name, so it was quite a solid conversation there, which kind of helped kind of prove that they were actually fixing the outcome of that match. So further to that match, that player in particular, like I alluded to earlier, there were actually 4 additional players identified, so 5 in total, including the original player that was born from that match alert. That led to further investigation. Those new players identified were all open to new investigations, and we once again returned to the country and interviewed those players. More phone downloads were conducted, and then it gets to the kind of nitty-gritty legal side where we put together our reports and it's sent to a legal team. That was reviewed, and on the basis of the original match alert, the betting data from the first match alert, the betting data from the second match alert, and all the phone downloads and the outcome of the interview, basically, those 5 professional tennis players were found to have committed 38 breaches of the tennis anti-corruption program. Those really range from whether it be contriving the outcome of the match, which we proved against those, the ones where we had the match alerts, to times where the player had attempted to contrive the outcome of the match, but basically the betting markets never opened. That's quite a common theme we find where players are trying to speak to corruptors and ask whether they can be paid for fixing the outcome of the match, and in the end, the markets just aren't there. Some cases they might get paid for that regardless. Other times they won't get paid unless they actually are able to place wagers on those matches. Again, they had breaches for failing to report, and ultimately it was a really good result and kind of showed how one match alert or 2 match alerts can be the starting blocks to a full-blown investigation, and you can have one player who we didn't know about in advance of any of those match alerts suddenly becoming a corrupter and being involved in fixing multiple matches. And that was the main thing for us, is just to kind of reiterate how important having compliant betting operators are, having that regulation of the sports betting market, is to show how without that a lot of our investigations would not start. And we wouldn't be able to get to the point where we're able to maintain the integrity of professional sports. And yeah, I thought that was that's just one of many of our investigations, but that's a recent one from my workload, which kind of proves or shows the importance of how a match alert from start to finish.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both Sarah and George. I always say this publicly, I always enjoy seeing a presentation from the ITIA, not just because of the really good insights, but of how hands-on and practical the presentations are. The quotes, the representation from the evidence that you see, the mobile evidence extraction, etc. And yeah, so for the last minute, I hope everyone saw that investigating and prosecuting match fixing is not an easy task. It requires a lot of collaboration, not just from betting operators to sports, but as you've seen in the ITIA's presentation, they look at multiple different evidences. But it's a fight worth fighting for, because of all the losses, not just financial, but reputational, and so forth. But yeah, I thank ITIA again for joining me for this masterclass. And if you found this insightful, please stay on, because in the next panel, we'll continue the sports betting integrity discussion. Yeah, thank you.